What up, y'all? Mr. Z Nation, aka Savage Armor Jones Rafa, coming at you with another episode of The Dark Device. Today, we got something a little bit interesting. We're going to be doing a card spotlight. Today's spotlight is going to be on Machining Warsickle. Now, you're kind of wondering why I'm choosing Machining Warsickle as a card spotlight today. Well, it's pretty simple. So when the V series came out, it was actually pretty interesting because a lot of the older units were actually getting redone. And if you had a favorite clan, you was waiting for your favorite unit to get like a redo, a remake over, and hopefully that Bushiroad didn't completely fuck it over. My thing is, when it came to Mega Colony players, there was a lot of cards that a lot of people were waiting for. Me, for a prime example, was obviously waiting for Evil Armor General Giraffa, and despite that, Giraffa came very late past the prime of the V series. I'm still pretty happy and pretty satisfied with how Bushiroad handled Evil Armor General Giraffa's skill. I definitely can't wait for him to come out in a couple of months over here in America, well, in the English format, I guess. But there's a certain card that a lot of people I've noticed in the Mega Colony community actually wants to get reprinted and have a remake over and everything else like that, and that is Machining Warsickle. So for those who either needs a refresher or doesn't remember because you probably never played around the time this card was out, let's explain. So it has a Vanguard Circle effect on Limit Break 4. At the end of the battle that this unit attacked, if the attack did not hit, you may pay the cost of Counterblast 2 to choose one of your opponent's Vanguards, and that unit cannot stand during your opponent's next stand phase. It also have another ability where you Counterblast one with Machining in its card name. When it's placed on the Vanguard Circle, you may pay the cost. If you do, choose a card from your soul with Machining in its card name and call it to the Rearguard Circle at rest. Alright, so this card is actually pretty interesting. It has like a lot of effects going with it. And this will be Patient Zero on the mini cards that will give the identity of stunning your opponent's Vanguard. It's all like, we have other cards such as Machining Tarantula Mark II. We also have, Machining Destroyer. We have Machining Despot. We had Stun Beetle, which is in a machining unit. And last but not least, we do have Empress Ghidorah. They are all units that does stun the Vanguard. Now, here's the thing. This card was the first one to actually do the stun mechanic, which is actually pretty interesting. But I do feel like that there were a few issues. For one, this card did see a lot of play among Mega Colony players because he was a pretty good boss card. However, there was a lot of stuff stacked not in his favor. So here's a prime example of it. For anybody who's never played Vanguard during the OG era of Vanguard, Mega Colony did not have any counterblast whatsoever. Mega Colony did not get a decent amount of counterblast, like legitimate counterblast, until the Zoo Nation booster. And I know some people are gonna be sitting here like, oh, but what about Whittle? What about Vulcan? What about the Perfect Guard G? I think that's what they call it, like the ones that allows you to countercharge one if you have like the same copy in the drop zone when it's placed on the Guardian Circle. I think that's what they call, like, the Perfect Guard Gs. But yeah, what about all of those? And honestly, I have to say that they were counterchargers, but they weren't consistent counterchargers. Reason being is you have Vulcan that only countercharge at the beginning of your main phase, which means that he had to survive a whole turn just to get one countercharge. And then you also got to remember that if your Vanguard was not Dark Face, he did not have Resist, which means that if you're going against something like Kagero, Narukami, or even Link Joker, you were basically not really going to get that counter charge whatsoever. Again, it wasn't consistent enough. Then you have Whittle, for a prime example. That was another issue. It was not only a trigger that it was not only a trigger, but it activated during the end phase after going into the soul. And the problem with this, in my personal opinion, is that you have, in order to get a counter charge, you have to sacrifice hitting good numbers, which is pretty much one of the major reasons why I never liked this card. I mean, I'm not going to say I never liked it though, but I felt like this card was kind of sort of unnecessary. The conditions, because you have like a lot of other like trigger units that that just puts itself into the soul and you counter charge one. But the fact that this was one of our only good counter chargers at the time until the Z Nation booster came out, it sucks. I'm gonna be real with you on that. There was really no point of really using this card outside of fueling Intimidating Mutant Darkface's GB2. Outside of that, there was really no point of really using this card. But outside of that, you know, we didn't really have that many good counter chargers whatsoever, and Mega Colony was very counterblast heavy. So that's kind of sort of one of the major issues that this card have. Another one is PGs. The problem with PGs was that we didn't really have a decent machining PG until, again, the Zoo Nation booster. Before that, we had machining Ladybug, which was a quintet wall, but let's be real, nobody's really running 4 quintet walls, and our only other PG at that particular time was Paralyzed Madonna, which was not a machining. And the problem with machinings back in the OG era of Vanguard was that it was one of those subclans that was very strict, which means that if you wanted to soul blast something, it had to be a card machining this thing. If you wanted to counterblast something, it had to have machining this card name, which means that if you were to accidentally ride into Paralyzed Madonna, which was pretty much a huge issue, there will be almost impossible to really soul blast it out or use it as a soul blast cost. And the same thing happened with counterblasting. If it was in the damage zone, you just have to pray to Jesus that it doesn't hit the damage zone, and you wouldn't be able to do it. Luckily, at least his first ability allows you to counterblast 2 generic, whereas Spark Hercules back in the day, you had to counterblast 2 with machining his card name. So even though the second ability you still have to counterblast on machining his card name in order to get the other skill, it's still a pretty huge issue at the end of the day. Not to mention that this card came out in Fighters Collection 2014, which was like the end of the Link Joker arc and the beginning of the Legion era, which means that even though Mega Colony only got 2 cards throughout the whole Legion era, you still got to remember that Legions were powerful enough to power creep out any limit break based unit, unless if it was a break ride. You basically got screwed over in a way, because it was hard for limit break era units to actually be used. Not to say that you weren't using him, but let's be real, if you had to choose between using him and Tarantula Mark II, more likely you will probably go to Tarantula Mark II, even though this card had a better counterblast ability. My thing is this. Well, I think the way I played it back in the day was that I was using Warsickle as a finisher and using Tarantula Mark II as, mid-game, for mid-game. So I'll go into Tarantula Mark II, hopefully get a few stuns here and there, but then when it came to late game, I would go into Warsickle because I knew for a fact that my opponent, that it had a non-hit skill, I guess that's what you want to call it. It had a non-hit skill, and you can easily trick your opponent into doing that. Matter of fact, I have a quick short story. This card is actually the major reason why In one of the first few shop tournaments that I had, I actually got runner-up. See, this was something that I think this was actually around the time the card actually came out, actually, if I remember correctly. Fires Collection 2014 just came out. We had a shop tournament. It was like about 23 or 25 people or something like that. I got runner up. And the last one I was going against was my friend, which was also on the channel before, the collector. He was running, so he was playing Novell. For those who's not familiar with what Novell does, when she attacks, I mean, when during her battle phase, triggers don't activate. So that means that you're at 5 damage, you let the attack hit, you can't, even if it's a heal trigger, you can't heal whatsoever. And unfortunately, that's kind of sort of what happened. I lost because I couldn't heal. But it wasn't just because I couldn't heal. It was the fact that the turn prior, I didn't have any counterblast to stun my opponent's Vanguard. And because counterblast was a major issue, I basically lost because I couldn't keep my opponent's Vanguard stunned. All I needed was one particular turn left to stun the opponent's Vanguard once again, and I probably would have had it. But the seeing that like I couldn't endure long enough, I basically got runner up. But it's all cool. We can always run that run back if he's watching this. But yo, anyway, this card is actually pretty good. At the end of the day, do I believe that Warsickle should come back to the V series? Absolutely. I will admit that the ability to stun your opponent's Vanguard isn't going to be broken in V format, only due to the simple fact that we had Dueling Dragons Zangetsu. Or was it Zimbaku? Zimbaku was the one that you can counterblast to and discard a card in order to prevent your opponent from restanding. But he's been out since almost the beginning of the V series, so stunning the Vanguard wouldn't be so broken at the end of the day. But overall, I definitely give this card a 4 out of 5. I felt like that this card came out at the wrong time, and that I wish that this card would have been played at its full potential. But by the time we got all the counterblasting and like the machining perfect guard and all that, it was way too late for this card to actually do something. So hopefully it does get a fresh, a new air when we come out with the like the Clan Collection Volume 5 or 6, because I don't believe this is going to be part of 3 or 4. But with that being said, my name is Z Nation, aka Savage on the Judge Alpha. This has been the Dark Device.